Good morning and happy Mother's Day. And in that song, Because I Said So, it captures some really important elements that I want to share today for us to reflect on and as a way to kind of guide our spiritual engagement for this week. Who here, besides David, got the answer when we asked why? Did we get the answer? Because I said so. Okay, you didn't. And I didn't tend to use it with my kids because I was raised in a different generation where you were supposed to be able to reason with the children. And that's kind of escalated to the point now where children are, it's infrequent that children ever get any kind of direction, that there's a much more laissez-faire, oh, well, if you really want that kind of thing. When we're talking this month, the theme is around using spiritual law. Now, the notion of law can create reactions. In a number of communities, the people that represent the law, one of the big outrages in recent years with a greater attention to race and equity is the law is not equally, justly distributed. I remember seeing a video this week where an African-American man was at a Waffle House, and I watched the officer just strangling him. And he was charged with being disrespectful to the cop for his behavior while the cop was strangling him. And I just wonder, how is it that any of us would be really respectful of someone who's strangling us? It doesn't engender an automatic kind of, I will respect you as you threaten my life. And some of that kind of can tie back to that message that we heard in the reading, the message where he's asking, if I held the bottle, what would that be like? Oh, it would be fine. But if I held it for 24 hours, what would it be like? Oh, that would be painful. And what I want to play with is, how do we balance our own response? How do we respond to injustice in a way that uses divine law and responds to generate a new creation? It's really what I want us to play with. The notion of spiritual laws is that what we say has power in the world. Sometimes that can feel that it's true, and sometimes it feels like a stretch. Has anyone here ever felt like, okay, I've said things, and I am not seeing the universe respond in accord with my declaring that it's going to be so?
Yeah.
And then one of the things that can get very tricky is sometimes this teaching can take on a little bit holier than thou attitude that, well, what's in your consciousness? Obviously you're not believing your word. Obviously there's something else inside of you, that your word is not really your word. I don't know, that's kind of equally judgy in my mind, and it hardly serves as a helpful guide. That whole notion of spiritual superiority. Well, you know, if you were really doing it right, you would have exactly what you want. One of the complexities is that we live in a world filled with other people who are also speaking words. And sometimes we encounter those words as awful. I mean, the person said, we encounter injustices. And to simply take on the notion that this injustice is the outpicturing of my own word can be a little crazy-making. So what in my consciousness generated the kind of attitude that would lead a political leader to mock a disabled person? I don't know. I think it's pretty difficult, but I think it does speak to a broader consciousness, that there is an energy alive in people that mockery is something that's okay to do. So rather than holding it as a personal inquiry to dive deep inside and say, what am I doing wrong in me? Rather, how do I look at that as an invitation to engage? How do I continue to let that perpetrate if I don't speak my word? Now, I want to pull this in. I want to weave it with a couple of other ideas. We all know that it's Mother's Day. Again, happy Mother's Day. One of the mothers that I want to look at and consider her story as a vehicle for engaging in the spiritual practice of speaking and acting powerfully is the Greek goddess Demeter. Now, how many people are really familiar with Demeter?
When you tell the story, I'm going to know it, but
Okay.
I can't tell it.
Okay. Demeter doesn't have some of the kind of sexier qualities of some of the other gods. You know, Zeus is the god of lightning and the god of the sky, and Poseidon is the underwater god with that trident and looks, you know, really powerful and does things. And Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and people spoke of her to lead them in battle because she could help them come up with the best strategies. A number of years ago, psychologist Jean Sinead Bolin presented a series of the Greek goddesses as ways to consider who, well, specifically she was looking at women, but I think that the implications were far greater for every person. She was proposing the idea that these Greek goddesses, these archetypes, were features that are alive. And the reason that their stories are so powerful is that they are a feature that can be found in any woman that we encounter. Mm-hmm. And the story of Demeter is the mother archetype. Now I think David's song is, that's a mother who just says, this is how it's going to be. That's a slightly different flavor of the mother archetype than the other archetype that I grew up with. There was actually a cartoon, Wait Till Your Father Gets Home. Because it wasn't the mother who was going to be distributing justice. It wasn't the mother who was going to be deciding how this was going to be dealt with. It was the father. And I think part of that has a feature that's related to the times when it was happening. Because many of us know that during the Second World War, when all the men who were eligible were sent off to fight, and the people that were not sent off to fight were the women. And the women then rose up and were working in the factories and were for people in the factories. They were making sure stuff got done. Wait Till Your Father Got Home came back as a male reaction to, oh my God, I don't know that I can deal with this. I'm stepping into a world where these are extremely competent women, and my leadership with telling men what to do, these women aren't necessarily listening to me because they figured out how to do it without me. And so there's been a little bit of this wrestling ever since. The notion of the mother archetype that I'd like to explore with Demeter, we get part of that story of that sense of powerlessness. The story typically starts with her beloved daughter, Persephone, snatched and taken by Hades, the third of the three brothers. All of creation was divided among the three brothers. You'll notice that there was no division of creation for the female goddesses. No. It went to Zeus was in heaven, Poseidon was the sea, and Hades was the underworld. I wouldn't know, however, that the women were everywhere else. So while Zeus was in heaven and Poseidon was deep under the sea, and Poseidon was under the sea and Hades was in hell, the women basically were everywhere else that really mattered. In the story, Persephone is stolen away. And Demeter, who is the sibling of Hades and Persephone and Zeus, the mother of Persephone, Poseidon.
Yes.
Sister of Poseidon, sister of Zeus, sister of Hades. She goes up and she says, an injustice has been done. She was not hesitant to declare that an injustice had been done. And somewhat like we encounter, the justice system was like, too bad. You snooze, you lose. You weren't there to protect her. You told her she should watch herself and she didn't. Ha-ha. No big deal. How often do we find ourselves in our lives in positions where it just doesn't feel just? Now, I would say that to blame that on Demeter, what was in your consciousness, Demeter, is not going to help come to a solution. Demeter went through a series of operations to engage with that unjust system. Round one, she disguised herself and went to the world. And she became a serving woman. And she served in the home of royalty. And while she was there, she helped with the raising of a son. And the son's name was Achilles. And she just really took Achilles, for some reason, really appealed to her. So she thought, while I'm here, I might as well take advantage of some of my powers. So late at night, when everyone else was in the palace and in the kingdom was asleep, she would raise up the divine fire, and she was putting little baby Achilles into this fire, and she was girding him to be able to withstand any challenge that would come before him. She was declaring that he was powerful. And she, in that declaration, was making him invulnerable. How much do we look to our own words as able to engage in power? That's one of the things that Tayan was bringing forward in the abundance class. She asked us to do what? She asked us to notice, to be aware, and then out of that awareness to do. So Demeter, even though she didn't have her daughter, was still bringing more power into the world. Now one night, she was almost finished. She'd almost completed the task of making him invulnerable. The mother came in upon it and was screaming with horror, "Put down my son! Take him out of the fire! What are you doing? Are you crazy?" And Demeter then revealed herself and identified, "I am a goddess. I am Demeter." But the mother was like, "Take your hands off him. He's not your son." So Demeter said, "You realize he's unfinished." And we've all heard the expression Achilles' heel. The heel was the only place where that invulnerability, where it was withheld. And it wasn't necessarily a punishment from Demeter. How many times do we have something that's left unfinished that can end up being our own Achilles' heel? How many times do we feel like, oh, I'm almost through it, and then we just let it go? It isn't for lack of divine power or divine adequacy. It can be a lack of our own continuing on. So the question that Demeter's story raises up is, how do we imagine this kind of power as being available to us? How can we speak and declare power even when people say no? It's one of the things that I find really moving about Black Lives Matter, about Me Too. It's raised up all kinds of opposition. people say Black Lives Matter, and then you hear the whole whining, but white lives matter too, all lives matter. And my intent is not to, belittle, but my intent is to challenge people to get the point. Black Lives Matter is not simply a declaration. Black lives are the only lives that matter. It's to expand the consciousness and recognize that black lives matter too. Because the way we allow our society to act has been that black lives don't matter. So it's a very conscious counter voice that black lives do matter. And the Me Too movement is about the kind of assertions that men have made, the kinds of disrespect that men have blatantly used in engaging with women is not occasional. It is not rare. It is not unheard of. It happens over and over and over again. One of the things that was really shocking, Bill Cosby, when I was a little kid, I'd race to Saturday morning, to the TV to be able to watch Bill Cosby and see the kids in the neighborhood. Watch the Huxtables, Bill Cosby's Huxtable shows. Here he was playing the role of a physician, and he was married to a woman who was an attorney. Here he was presenting an image of an African-American family that had made it, that was very successful. And the value of the daughters and the value of the son. So all of this is a persona. Meanwhile, there were a failure to be respectful to women. And there were years and years and years of women complaining about it and nothing happening. So these voices coming forward, we have the capacity to decide, do I join with these voices? Do I uphold these voices? Do I support these voices? We can decide how to use the power of our words. The power of the hashtag. Ooh. The power of listening to the stories with an open mind, rather than automatically shutting them off and say, well, I never saw it, so how bad can it be? Well, it all depends on our field of vision. How much are we willing to expand our field of vision? In that story of Demeter, round one, she leaves the palace. And round two, she's like, okay, I tried being nice. I tried going about by committing myself into service, into the raising of another child. I tried. I gave it a good shot. How often do we feel like we tried? Then Demeter was like, okay, I'm going to play hardball with you people. I went to the justice system and they sent me away. I became a servant among the people and they sent me away. Now, I am going to not let anything live. Nothing is going to grow. One of the things about the power of our words is we can create hell. In that story of Demeter, nothing could grow. She was withholding life because that was a capacity that was available to her. We all have the power to create hell. I can't speak for any of you, but I can speak that I have created a very vivid Dante's Inferno in various elements of my life. While I was waiting for my transplant, I had clearly identified how my suffering was far greater than anything Jesus Christ on Calvary ever had to go through. I mean, I literally said, Jesus had 3 hours on the cross, then it was over. I had months and months and months and months and months of kidney failure. And it lasts a lot longer than three hours. There's some really good blasphemy there. You know, the fact that I could elevate my own personal suffering to kind of the penultimate suffering in the Christian religious orientation lets me share that I was an egomaniac about my own suffering. But how many times do we use the story of our suffering as the way to connect with people? How many times do we, oh, you think that's bad? Let me tell you my story. How many times is that a way that we connect? I remember some years ago, a wise teacher of me said, not everybody has love in common, but we all have pain in common. And I remember hearing it at the time, I was like, ooh. But I think it was a very accurate capturing. I think we share our stories of pain because when we don't know any other way, that may be how we can make connections. I know that connections, like telling my painful stories, it got me sympathy. It got me a listening ear. And it's my intent with describing this is to say that it's a means to our power. I mean, this is what Demeter did. She's like, nothing else is going to grow. You don't like it? Fix the problem. All you have to do is give me Persephone back. And it's all done and over. How many times do we feel like we use our own suffering as a bargaining chip? But the question is, do we want to stay in that kind of hell? Again, I have us think about that metaphor of as long as we're holding on to that bottle, which represents our suffering, as long as we feed ourselves poison, thinking that the person that's offended us is going to be harmed by that, I'm not going to forgive them. I mean, I remember the time after my divorce, you know, my bitterness was not affecting my ex-wife one iota. She was not really devastated by my suffering. And I was devastated that she wasn't devastated. I mean, you know, here was somebody that I was most important, and now I'm not. Now this extreme suffering that I'm putting myself through doesn't matter to you? Well, pause. Put it on pause. Look at the picture and say, this is really making sense. It doesn't always make sense. So one of the things that happens in the process of being human is that how we decide things and how we act is not always reasonable, logical, or making sense. It's how we're coping with the world. We can hear messages that we get to choose to forgive, or to hold on, or to let go. But ultimately, we have to do it when we're ready. Now, in Demeter's case, people were really panicky. They were really scared. Okay, we are starving now. This story of starvation, the story of running out, it's a common story that gets told over and over and over again. That there's this crisis moment. And in that crisis moment, that's when things break through. That's when the Justice Department, Poseidon and Zeus and Hades get together and say, you know, listen, we're hearing a lot of complaints. And in fact, if we don't address those complaints, everybody is going to be dead, and Hades is going to have the whole meal deal, and nobody's going to be left with anything. So, a deal was arranged that Persephone would be freed. But there was a contingency clause. And the contingency clause is, if you didn't eat anything down there, then you're free to go forever. Persephone had eaten of a pomegranate that had been offered. Now, you may or may not know that a pomegranate is what was in the Jewish Hebrew tradition, that's what they really believe was in the Garden of Eden, was a pomegranate. So the story of Persephone eating the pomegranate is a retelling of the story of Eve eating the pomegranate. And that in that eating of the pomegranate, Persephone was not able to just simply go back as if nothing had ever happened. What happens is that Persephone has to go back to Hades 3 months of the year because she had eaten 3 Persephone seeds. Pomegranate seeds. Too many peas. Persephone, pomegranate. Poseidon. Polydactyl. The notion was that every year Persephone would return to Hades. But she wasn't going to be returning as the helpless young girl, because if you read Jean Sinead Boland's story, one of the elements of Persephone is that she's not only the princess daughter, she's also the queen of the underworld. And as queen of the underworld, she did have power. So sometimes, even when we don't realize that power is happening, Persephone, that character Persephone, did have power. So Persephone is returned, and the mother and daughter are reunited. Now, one of the things that people complain about in the story is Persephone, as a character, is someone for whom everything happened to. And isn't that terrible? That someone is being identified as happy too? The thing is this. I think that the story is important because a lot of times we feel and we experience that life is happening to us. And if there was not a character, Persephone, who gets to embody that, it would not address what we experience. That notion of experiencing life as happening to us is an acknowledgement that sometimes, even with the best science of mind teachings, we can't always use it. We can't always find that it's working for us. And again, I say this not in shame, but I say this because sometimes there are circumstances that arise. You know, this whole notion, he was in a car accident and he's in a coma. What in his consciousness caused that coma? It's just a ridiculous interplay. The notion is, though, that we will encounter circumstances where people seem victimized by how life is going. And if our response is simply to rail against the divine and rail against spirit, then we're railing from a place of entering into and landing in that land of powerlessness. Talked about it before. Yea, though you walk through the valley of darkness. It's walking through the valley of darkness. It is not building a condo there and then paying homeowners dues on a monthly basis. That experience of powerlessness, that experience of loss, that experience of it's not all here. Moms are intimately aware with that. Moms have their children, and for the most part, they expect that their children will leave. I mean, adolescence makes moms kind of happy that the children leave. That whole notion of spoiling the nest. I mean, in that instance, the moms feel like, I did all of this for you and you're doing this to me now? Motherhood carries within it that same cycle. of the joy of beginnings and the grief of endings. How do we look to that experience of motherhood as a guide in any given moment for what spiritual practice, for what spiritual law to call upon? Are we at the beginning of things, declaring our word? Demeter made Achilles really powerful. Achilles was a warrior well known for his capacities. And these capacities were unusual. They did not come from Zeus. They did not come from Hera. They did not come from the big names. They came from Demeter, who is not a goddess who tends to be thought about a lot in terms of the Greek stories. But Achilles is a hero that you hear a lot about. And he had capacities that rivaled Hercules, the son of Zeus. So, figuring things out, we can have that power like Demeter had, to convey power and bless others with power. In terms of that story of Jesus, there has been a reflection that, well, if Jesus was only born of Mary, then Jesus' biology was only from Mary. That Jesus' DNA was just what Mary had. Half of us is, at least half of us, is what our moms had. How do we move that forward in power? How do we put our words and declare those things that we desire? Simple teaching: seed, soil, plant in the science of mind. Seed, naming our thought. Soil is this law, this automatic action. Plant, the body, how it comes into form, how it comes into being, how it manifests. Let's pay attention to what we bring forward into manifestation. And other side of things, moms in hell. I know I put my mom through her own personal realm of hell. I don't know about any of you. I mean, you might have been far better children than I was with my mom. But that didn't land my mom in hell forever. My mom decided not to stay there. She didn't pay homeowners dues. She decided that she was going to move on through. We can see when it is that we are choosing hell, and we can pause. We can notice, we can be aware, and then we can do. Do we want to stay here? Sometimes we may answer yes. I'm not finished with this yet. I still have some more stuff that I've got to do. And to be gentle with ourselves about that. Our feeling state may not let us leave. And rather than telling ourselves, I should, because we know how healthy that is, I should be over that by now. I should be so much better. I know all these things, and I should be having them lift me up. Should, shame, what they engender is not a place of power. So if we are in a dark place, if we are in hell, how do we use that time well? I mean, it was from that place that Demeter was able to get a really good bargain. She went from having nothing to having at least Persephone free for 9 out of 12 months. Yeah, she didn't get everything, but she got a pretty good amount. And on those 3 remaining months, her daughter got to be queen somewhere else. So, all told, it wasn't a losing hand that she had. How do we be with the new beginnings? with those troubled places? And how do we keep speaking words of power and continue to declare that where I am right here, right now is perfect? So I invite us to just take a deep breath in. And I look to that divine quality of love. I look to that divine quality of beauty. And I let my mind fill with every tender expression, thoughts, words, deeds, that mothers have conveyed to their young. I look to that and I invite us to sink into that sensation of that love, of that beauty of being nurtured, and to experience that as a means through which the divine has and is expressing love and beauty. That this is a means through which the divine is embodying itself as love and beauty. And knowing that this has been expressed and embodied in creation, I know that it continues to express in, through, and as all that is. This divine love, this divine beauty has no limitation. It has complete, full expression and expansion. It is living in, through, and as all that is. So I know that my very nature is one with love. My very nature is one with beauty. And I know that that is the truth for everyone here, that these words are the truth of all that are. That there is no way that Spirit withholds itself from this loving, beautiful expression. Therefore, I speak this word and I declare. Each one of us are a place through which greater expressions of power, of love, of beauty are made manifest moment by moment in our lives. Manifest by the choices that are embraced. Manifested by the actions that are taken. I give thanks that divine love and divine beauty, these elements of the feminine spirit, of the Sophia, of the loving wisdom, make themselves manifest moment by moment by moment. That each person owes half of their biological presence to that human mother who gave birth to us. And from this place of gratitude, I release these words to the automatic action of the law and say, and so it is.